There is a number that will completely blow your mind. Inside ancient Egyptian tombs, dating back more than 3,000 years, archaeologists actually discovered jars of honey that were still perfectly edible. Just think about it. While whole empires collapsed and entire civilizations vanished, that golden liquid sat quietly in the pharaoh's tombs without spoiling at all. It sounds like a myth, but it is absolute scientific fact. While milk goes bad in a few days, cooked rice sours overnight in the summer, and meat starts to smell after just a few hours. Honey is one of the very few natural foods on Earth that can last almost indefinitely if stored properly. What is even more amazing is that humans did not invent this time-defying superfood. Tiny bees are the genius chemists behind the whole process. Honey is not just a sweet treat. It is a biological masterpiece evolved over tens of millions of years. Here are a few cool facts about honey you might want to know. China is currently the largest honey producer in the world, churning out over 450,000 tons every year, which is nearly a quarter of the global supply. Meanwhile, the US consumes a massive amount, but has to import a ton because they cannot produce enough to meet demand. To make just about 500 grams of honey, bees have to fly a total distance equal to tens of thousands of kilometers and visit around 2 million flowers. This means that a small jar of honey on your dinner table is actually a massive construction project completed by an entire colony. One of the most expensive honeys in the world is Centauri honey from Turkey, harvested from caves over 1,800 meters deep. At one point, this honey sold for over 10,000 US dollars per kilogram, as expensive as a nice ride, a motorcycle, of course. So, what exactly is honey? Many people think honey is simply sweet water made by bees. But, from a scientific perspective, honey is actually a highly sophisticated preservation system. It starts when worker bees fly out to suck nectar from flowers and plants. This liquid is mostly water and sugar. If left alone, it could easily ferment and spoil, just like regular fruit juice. But bees do not bring it back to eat right away. They process it into a form of food that lasts a very long time. When a bee sips nectar, the liquid is stored in a special honey stomach, kept separate from its regular digestive system. During the flight back to the hive, enzymes in the bee's body begin breaking down the structure of those sugars. Once they reach the hive, the real fun begins. Bees pass the nectar to one another, mouth to mouth. It sounds pretty bizarre to us, but it is actually an incredibly efficient biological assembly line. With every handoff, more enzymes are added to the nectar. After that, the bees deposit the honey into wax cells and continuously fanning their wings to evaporate the water. This is the most crucial step. Bacteria and yeast need water to survive, but bees intentionally dry the honey out to an extreme degree. For comparison, meat is about 70%, water, fruit is around 80 to 90%, and cooked rice is roughly 60%, but honey contains less than 20% water. This makes honey a chemical desert. Any bacteria that wander in basically dehydrate and die instantly. Not only that, but even if bacteria manage to get in, honey helps destroy them. What really impresses scientists is that honey contains a powerful, natural, antibacterial environment. During the honey-making process, bees produce something similar to hydrogen peroxide. That is right, the exact disinfectant humans use to clean wounds is something bees figured out how to use long before we even knew what bacteria were. The amount in honey isn't strong enough to harm the bees, but it is plenty to stop bacteria and mold in their tracks. This means any microorganism trying to live in honey has to survive a brutal gauntlet. First, there is the lack of water. Next, the sugar-heavy environment literally sucks the moisture right out of their bodies. Then, they hit an acidic environment, and finally, a hydrogen peroxide attack. The pH of honey is usually between 3 and 4.5, which is quite acidic for most bacteria, considering they prefer a near-neutral pH of around 7. Dropping bacteria into honey is like throwing a freshwater fish into the salty ocean. Because of this, honey becomes a biological fortress where bacteria find it almost impossible to survive for long. Returning to the tombs, the ancient Egyptians did not know about enzymes or bacteria, but they realized one thing: honey is incredibly special. In many ancient texts, honey was used as food, medicine, offerings to the gods, and even as a preservative. It was so valuable that it was regularly placed in pharaohs' tombs as a gift for the afterlife. The Egyptians also smeared honey on wounds because they noticed it helped keep infections away. Today, modern science confirms they were totally on to something. Certain types of medical-grade honey are still used to help treat burns and minor wounds. What shocks modern people the most is that many excavated ancient jars of honey are still edible. Just picture it. That honey was made when humanity had no electricity, no internet, and no steam engines, yet it still exists today. However, saying honey lasts forever does not mean it is absolutely immortal under any condition. If stored incorrectly, honey can still spoil. The ultimate culprit is usually water. When honey is diluted or left uncovered for too long, moisture creeps in and the water content rises. That is when yeast wakes up and fermentation kicks in. This is why some old bottles of honey might develop a sour smell, bubbles, or a slight alcohol taste. Actually, humans intentionally did this thousands of years ago. One of the oldest alcoholic drinks in the world is mead, or honey wine, which the Vikings were particularly fond of. It just shows how interesting life is. Bees spent millions of years evolving to create a food that never spoils, and humans figured out a way to add water to turn it into alcohol. Now, let us get into a few other interesting stories about honey. A lot of people see honey crystallize and immediately think they bought a fake product. But, in reality, in most cases, crystallization is a sign of natural honey. This whole debate about telling real and fake honey apart causes a lot of arguments. The thing is, honey naturally contains a ton of glucose. Over time, glucose tends to separate from the water and form crystals. Some types of honey, like longan, rapeseed, or coffee honey, crystallize very quickly. This is just a natural physical change, not a sign that the honey has gone bad. All you need to do is soak the bottle in warm water at around 40 degrees Celsius, and the honey will liquefy right back. On the flip side, a lot of commercial honey is heavily heat-treated, so it stays perfectly liquid and pretty on store shelves. But that process can sometimes destroy the precious natural enzymes inside. The question is, why can't other species do what honeybees do? Plenty of insects sip nectar, but none of them create such a formidable preservation system. The answer lies in social evolution. Honeybees live in massive, highly organized colonies with permanent hives, so they need to store food for the long haul. Over millions of years, they evolved into expert food preservers. They know how to harvest, process, dehydrate, seal with wax, and keep the hive temperature perfectly stable. Every beehive is essentially a self-running food factory. The incredible part is that this whole system operates without computers, electricity, or a central leader. Each bee just performs a tiny task based on instinct, yet the whole colony pulls off an incredibly complex result. The more we learn, the more we realize that honeybees are some of the most remarkable creatures in nature. Today, honey is pretty common, so many people do not see it as anything special. But throughout most of human history, it was a luxury. Before cane sugar was mass-produced, honey was pretty much the highest quality sweetener humans had. In medieval Europe, honey was used for baking, medicine, and wine, and some places even used it to pay taxes. There were honey-hunting tribes who braved extreme dangers, climbing cliffs dozens of meters high, just to harvest wild hives. In Nepal today, the Himalayan cliff honey hunters still exist. They hang from ropes along cliff faces hundreds of meters up just to harvest honey from some of the largest bees in the world, all for that liquid gold. This shows just how powerful the allure of honey has been throughout human history. Looking at the bigger picture, honey is more than just food. It is a story of natural survival. Flowers make nectar to attract insects, and bees take that nectar to survive the winter. Humans, in turn, learn to use honey as food, medicine, and a cultural symbol. It is a tiny droplet of liquid that connects plants, insects, climate, chemistry, medicine, and the history of civilization. The more you think about it, the more impressive it gets. A creature no bigger than your pinky finger can create a food that leaves both bacteria and time completely helpless. It is something humans probably could not even pull off without modern science. Thank you for tuning in to this story. If you found it interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. But for now, it is time to say goodbye.